Hello students, welcome back to my class. Today I will be back with Shakespeare's famous tragedy Macbeth, and today I will be dealing with another very important topic, which is the Potter scene. So the title of my today's talk is Authenticity and Importance of the Potter scene, Act 2, Scene 3 in Macbeth. Now, there are many important scenes in Macbeth which has certain important role to play for the development of the plot. And from that perspective, Potter scene has a vivid role to play. But there are certain controversies regarding the scene. Some says this scene is not the best creations of Shakespeare. Some says this scene does not do justice to the play. So let us discuss this particular scene and let us find out what the scene implies, what is the important role to play, and what is the purpose of the scene in the development of the plot. Okay, so let us begin. And those who are watching my video for the first time today, you may know that I have already presented so many topics. I have already talked about so many important topics from Macbeth, and you may follow my earlier lectures regarding Macbeth. Okay, so let us begin. The Act 2, Scene 3, or the Potter scene in Macbeth, has evoked a host of controversial responses from the critic. In this scene, Samuel Taylor Coleridge found the crudity of language as well as the vulgarity of emotion and expression, which irritated him so much that he jumped to the conclusion that it had been written for the mob by another hand. I mean, he didn't believe that this is the very scene which is written by Shakespeare. According to his opinion, this particular scene was written by someone else and later was added to the original play, the Macbeth. Okay. Coleridge considered this scene as some kind of interpolation because it was not befitting the subtle and polished poetry of Shakespeare. However, the line of thinking has been repeatedly rejected by modern critics. There are so many critics who are actually going against the opinion of Coleridge. Some of them consider that the Coleridge's idea is not that much of true. Modern scholars like Hales proves conclusively that the scene is Shakespeare's own creation as he observes the following points. He has observed several important points. The points are: firstly, the scene goes along with the knocking of the door which started at the previous scene. If we read the play closely, we could see that the previous scene was somewhere Lady Macbeth and Macbeth are actually planning about the regicide, and just before the regicide and just after the regicide, there was some kind of knocking inside their chest, as if someone is pounding, and there is a sense of suspense, sense of thrill, which can be found out. So this scene can be seen as the continuation of that kind of knocking which started in the previous scene. The emotional contrast, the second point is, the emotional contrast is deliberate in Shakespeare's manner. Okay, Shakespeare has tried to create some kind of emotional contrast here, which means in the earlier scene Shakespeare has taken the audience to the pinnacle of suspense, whether Macbeth is able to kill Duncan or not, whether he has been caught up after the crime. So this kind of emotional suspense was there, but this particular scene creates some kind of contrast to that particular ideas. Okay, and the third point, which is pointed out by Hales, is the dramatically relevant speech of the Potter reflects the style and language of Shakespeare. So Hales is absolutely sure that the speech of the Potter reflects the style and language of Shakespeare. William Hazlitt, also passionately defends the relevance and significance of the particular scene, and he believes the scene is essentially Shakespearean and as integral to the play. So Hazlitt is very much confident about the genuinity of the particular scene. Okay. So let us discuss more about the scene. So the Potter scene begins with the drunken Potter of Macbeth's castle, and who was totally out of wits, and he was actually rambling out certain crude jokes that befit his unsophisticated and maybe he was drunken, so unsophisticated and tipsy nature. The Potter in his drunken boat identifies himself with the Potter of Hellgate. Okay, so Potter of Hellgate means as if he is working at the Hellgate, and as if the castle of Macbeth is compared to the hell. So it is the dawn time, and Macduff and Lennox they were actually knocking at the gate of Macbeth's castle because they were not present at the previous night, along with Duncan and Donalbain and MacDonald's. So Macduff and Lennox, they knock at the gate of the Macbeth's castle, and with the knocking, the Potter imagine himself as the devil's Potter. So the thing is, the person who was standing at the opposite side of the gate, he was a potter, simple potter, and Macduff and Lennox, who were visiting Macbeth's castle, they were knocking at the gate. So that was the scene, and the Potter was very much tipsy, very much unsophisticated, and very much maybe he was drunk. Okay, so without opening the gate, he was actually imagining that this is the hell and he is the gatekeeper of the hell. So he was wondering who are the people who are actually knocking on the gate. Okay, so the Potter who imagines himself as the devil's Potter feels that knocking at the hell gate is meant by sinful souls. So perhaps there are certain sinful souls out there who wants to enter the hell, and in order to enter the hell, they are actually knocking on the gate of the Macbeth's castle. So we are talking about the day where immediately before that immediately before the night when Duncan was being killed by Macbeth, and this scene is kind of relief of that absolute silence which has been presented in this earlier scene. Okay, so these are he was thinking that there are certain sinful souls who wanted to enter the hell, and he is the Potter of the Hellgate who has to adjust them to adjust inside the hell. Okay, so there is an anthology between this episode and the scene in the Mystery Cycle, which dramatizes the harrowing of the hell. So there is a play in Mystery Cycle, mystery play, which is named as Harrowing of the Hell. So there is a scene which can be compared. We can draw certain analogy between these two scenes. It recalls the scenes of the Townley Circle. Those who do not understand about what is a Townley Circle and what is a mystery play, you people should see my earlier video, which is the origin and development of English drama. There you will get all the answers regarding these queries. So this particular scene, the Potter scene, recalls the scenes of the Townley Cycle, where Jesus, standing before the gates of hell, is barred by a gatekeeper named Ribald, and thus probably Shakespeare manages to give the play a universal appeal without any violation of the unity of space. Okay, so Shakespeare has perhaps served this kind of purpose, and this interpretation is not mine actually. This has been interpreted by so many Shakespearean critics. Okay, so yeah, so in the scene we can see there are 3 knocking, and after each knocking, the gatekeeper, the Potter, he was actually thinking of some person after each knocking. So let us know what he was thinking actually. So after hearing the first knocking, the Potter imagines that who is actually knocking. So he imagines that it is to be a farmer who hoarded corn to make money out of scarcity in the land. But later he hanged himself, he committed suicide on finding that the harvest was so abundant that the prices of the hoarded corn falls. Okay, so this is something which is reminiscent of the incident of Sordido in Ben Jonson's Every Man in His Humor. This is a famous play by Ben Jonson where there is a similar kind of incident where a young farmer named Sordido commits suicide because he hoarded certain amount of corns, but later found out that the prices of the corn was fallen, and so there was a huge financial loss on his part, so he committed suicide. So the Potter then this is the first knocking. So let us move to the second knocking. The Potter then imagines that the second applicant for admission on the hill must be an equivocator. So like Beelzebub in the first case, now the Potter swears in the name of another devil, Saturn. So since he considers himself in his drunken nature, he considers himself as the gateman of the hell, he swears the name of the devil Saturn. Here also we can have a typical allusion to Father Garnet. Father Garnet, who he was a Jewish priest connected with the gunpowder plot of 1605, and when he was charged with complicity in the above plot, the gunpowder plot, he tried to defend himself by mean of doctrine of equivocation. So according to the Potter at the Hell Gate, at the gate of the Macbeth's castle, the second person is compared to the equivocator, like Father Garnet. Okay, so and there was a third knocking also. Actually, what happened? Macduff and Lennox, they were knocking on the door, and the Potter who was standing inside the castle, he was thinking of this kind of person. He was thinking himself as the keeper of the Hell's Gate, and those souls are trying to enter the gate, and he was thinking about those souls in his own mind. Okay, so when the Potter heard the third knock, he thinks it to be an English tailor, and in the colloquial lines of the Potter, we also we can get a typical satire on the tailor's inclination to cheat And also he talks about English inclination for imitating foreign fashions, especially French fashions. Okay, so these are the three knockings which has been imagined by the potter, that the sinful souls who are actually standing at the opposite side of the gate might be these people. Okay, so okay, this is interesting. So this particular scene is a fine instant of dramatic irony. Here, the potter imagining himself as the keeper of the hell gate, as I have already mentioned, and we see the ironic truth of such a claim. We can see that to some extent his claim was ironically very true, because Macbeth has indeed made his castle a living hell, a place where such kind of sacrilegious murder has just been committed. The murder of Duncan, the regicide, the murder of the king. Okay, so there is another critic named Professor Honingman who wrote one famous book called Seven Great Tragedies of Shakespeare. And in this book, Professor Honingman interprets the irony in the Potter's speech as well. So, according to Honingman, Macbeth is like the greedy farmer, the first knocker of the gate. Macbeth is like the greedy farmer who had taken a great risk for large gains. He wanted to become the king, so he had taken a great risk. The Potter's comment also ironically foreshadows that Macbeth will also be doomed, owing to the failure of his conjuncture. The idea of equivocation in Potter's speech is also available in Macbeth as well. In the course of the play, the hypocritical Macbeth constantly double deals with his language, that we can see. On face, he was very obedient to Duncan, but inside he had some kind of dark ambition which leads him to kill the king. So Macbeth was constantly double dealing with his correct language, and this is an art which an equivocator excels. So the tailor who stole a chip of clothes from the French house had destroyed the ordered design of the breeches. So what Honingman says, Macbeth ironically is like the tailor who destroyed the ordered design of Scotland by stealing a precious chip of the nation. Okay, so that these are the ideas which has been compared by Professor Honingman in his book Seven Great Tragedies of Shakespeare. Okay, so this particular scene talks a lot about the main concept of the play, that is treason and equivocation. Okay, so the reference of treason in this Potter's speech is some kind of reminder of the execution of Thane of Cawdor. So Thane of Cawdor was being executed for the act of treason against the King of Scotland. But ironically, the person who was made the Thane of Cawdor after that was Macbeth himself, who was the embodiment of treason, might be. So Duncan had built absolute trust in his Macbeth. Duncan has made some kind of absolute trust on him, and his treachery must ring a familiar bell in our ears also about an ugly universal fact of life. Like the person whom you trust becomes treacherous at the end. Okay, and the Potter's word on lechery have yet another significance as well. Here we can see they consist of series of antitheses. I have mentioned the antithesis here: provokes, unprovokes, desire, performance, then sets on, takes off, pursuit, desertance, stand to, not stand to, like this. Okay, so uh, these this kind of antithesis which has been propounded by the Potter has been presented here. So all these antitheses are linked with equivocation, deceit, and treachery. These not only provide a constant contrast between appearance and reality, but also suggest the paradox and enigma of the nature of man. Okay, so let us discuss about the purpose of the scene. How this scene has been created, why this scene has been created by Shakespeare. So the Potter in the scene, first thing is he breaks the horrible pent up atmosphere of the night where in Duncan's murder took place. So that kind of pent up atmosphere, the kind of hype, suspense which I have already talked, has been broken through this scene. So the Potter's half conscious remarks uttered in a state of drunkenness has something which is very related to the murder. We have tried to interpret that earlier also. So this also proves that the scene is not an interpolation. The repeated knocking at the beginning of the scene is also important, which perhaps ironically echoes the continuous pricking of Macbeth's consciousness. Macbeth was feeling as if someone is knocking inside his chest. Maybe it was his heart, maybe it was his conscience, and that kind of knocking has been continued in the knocking of the gate. Okay, so there is some kind of dramatic connection between the two scenes as well. Okay, so the scene does not look incoherent to its earlier scene. That is what I mean to say here. So the knocking was perhaps, it was echoing the continuous pricking in Macbeth's consciousness, and he perhaps hears the knocking both within and without after committing the regicide. Okay, and another thing is, like, the Potter scene is theatrically necessary to allow the action. I mean, in case of the actors who were actually playing Macbeth or Lady Macbeth, this scene was some kind of allowing them to take some time off. Like the Macbeth who was playing the role of Macbeth, he was allowed to wash his hands and change his clothes. So these things had to be done off stage. So perhaps for that reason, Shakespeare gives a some kind of rational space for competing the actors before discovery of the murder. So these scenes act as the buffer between the crime and the discovery of crime. Okay. So many scholars also have suggested that Potter's scene acts as a kind of comic relief, so as to take the present horror from the scene. As I have already mentioned Coleridge, so as Coleridge pointed out, Shakespeare never introduced the comic except when it may react the tragedy by harmonious contrast. He argues that a good dramatist like Shakespeare does not laboriously create feeling of tension and intensity only to dissipate into laughter. So, according to him, this scene was not meant for comic relief exclusively. Then there is another critic whose name is Thomas De Quincey, who thinks the scene helps to restore the normality, and it actually calms the excited sensibility of the spectators. Another critic, Wheeler Koch, says that the Potter's speech actually makes us realize more vividly the horror of the surrounding scene. Here, audience experience an atmosphere of horror and death, and the knocking on the gate as well as the Potter's speech brings back the audience back to human reality, and the this change of scene heightens the contrast between the dark world of murder and the beginning of the pulses of life. So this scene was set at dawn and the murder was set in the dark. So at the end, to conclude, I wanted to quote A.C. Bradley from Shakespeare's tragedy, where he says, "The Potter scene is not an alien to the rest of the play." So, A.C. Bradley also does not consider it as an adequate relief to the tragic tension. Rather, to him, it serves to heightens the intensity of the drama with a constant reminder of what has happened and what is going to follow. Thank you. And if you have any queries and questions, you may post it at the comment section below. Thank you.